March 15th, 2013. As a typical morning, I'm sitting in my office having my coffee, and I was thinking what I'm going to do for the day. And my phone rings. Now, I don't know about you, but when a blocked caller comes up, how many of you answer it? Yep, you're like me. I know it's the solicitor trying to sell me something that I don't want, or it's somebody trying to get me to do something that I don't want to do. But this morning, for some reason, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to hear them out. I like to argue, so I'm going to ask them what they want and try to see if they can actually sell me something. But what happens? I answer the phone as I always do. This is Wally Brewster. And on the other end of the line, a really eloquent gentleman says, "This is the pilot of Air Force One. Would you hold for the President of the United States?" That day, that conversation changed my life forever, and it changed the history. So let me tell you why. This was a time in 2013 that I was getting ready to have two dreams come true, both at once. I was going to marry the love of my life, and I was going to have the job of my life. But also imagine that a young boy from East Texas even has those dreams. That was something that I could have never imagined. So I was on cloud nine. Something amazing was happening in my life that I thought never would happen. But also imagine, at the same time, when I'm all excited, my family's excited, someone from a very powerful organization with someone next to him goes on national television and calls you a faggot. Unfortunately, it's not anything I have to think about. It is something that actually happened to me. As this went on, this became a national conversation, but it just didn't stop there. It became an international conversation. And it was something that we were struggling with because I could not understand what was going on. You see, I was going to a country that I loved, that I'd been visiting for many years, and I knew the people were people of love, not hate. So what was happening? Why was this happening? And it did not make any sense to me that this was what was going on. And I thought, how can a man like this promote hate? And that's what I kept thinking. Why does he hate me? Why does he hate me? And it was very challenging because at that point, I began to question my decision. Would the White House withdraw my nomination because they would just find it too difficult? Would the Dominican Republic decide not to allow me to come here? Did I make the wrong decision on which ambassadorship I said I wanted to do? I had all of these things swirling in my head, and I didn't know what to do. And I was angry because I had fear that I'd never had before. You see, it was something that I just could not understand. But the amazing thing about it is that I knew I had the backing of many people. I had the backing of the United States, had the backing of President Obama, I had the backing of my family, and I had the backing of generations that had been behind me, pulling it up so I even had the opportunity at this time to actually have this decision to make. But it kept going back to the question, how do people in places of power, how do they are able to be out there and make us have this fear that we have? So I went back to the hotel room in Washington, D.C. after the initial shock wore off. And I had a very tough conversation with my husband. I said, do we move forward? And then we started thinking, you know what? We've had discrimination against us our whole life. We're proud Christians. We're very proud of who we are, so we're not going to let this man rock our faith. We're proud to stand beside each other, and we're proud to go on this journey in life together, so we're not going to let this man rock our journey. And then we realized that this was something that, once again, we had this army of people behind. And we knew this army would go with us because we were on the right side of history and he was on the wrong side of history. But it took me back to that question that I kept having. Why does he hate me? Why do they hate me? Once again, I felt unwelcome, unwanted, threatened, and yes, unsafe. But after the initial shock wore off, we steeled our resolve and said we're moving forward. And we had the support of the Dominican president, we had the support of President Obama, and many others around us. And so, on November 14th, the United States Senate unanimously confirmed my appointment as U.S. Ambassador to the Dominican Republic. And 8 days later, as you see, my husband and I got married across the street after being sworn in by Vice President Biden. So my two dreams did come true, and they came true all at once. But I still kept having the question, how do we get past this hate that's happening in our world? We're such a divided society that I could not figure out, and I said, we've got to start studying this. And so over the past few years, we began to study why people in society hate. And it just didn't make sense to us to know that we had this challenge. And so we started looking at people who have been successful and been able to step above everything that has been done. And that's what I want to share with you here today. Because what we've learned is that if we really get past what I call the elephant in the room, which is fear, then we can get past anything, but we have to do things in order to get there. Because a lot of us don't realize, and as we started looking at it, the first form of communication was when you were born. You're not going to remember it, but those that were in the room with you will. And you know if you've had children what it was like. The first form of communication was when you made eye contact with that first person in that room. And that room was full of love. There was no hate. But yet what happens is with societal norms, pressures from outside, people all around, all these devices that happen, we grow up with all these things that have been told us for centuries and the way that we are supposed to act. And that begins to impress upon us how we're supposed to walk through this world and how we're supposed to communicate. And it becomes very challenging for us because we're not sure when to speak out and what to do, and we're afraid of so many things. And so our fear begins to take over. And it's important that we continue to look at ourselves, and that's what I want to talk to. Because we figured out there's 4 ways that you actually can get past this fear of not being able to speak. So let's look at it from this perspective. These are the 4 ways to elevate a tough conversation. And the reason it's important to elevate tough conversations is because as we've looked at the thread of what you need to do to make sure that you're effective is, I'm going to tell you the 4 points. 1, speak your truth. 2, don't hide in a crowd. 3, bring your allies to have your back. And 4, achieve the unachievable. Those are things that we have found throughout, as we've looked at this, how you can actually get past and elevate tough conversations. And you're going to ask why it's important, and I'm going to tell you why. We're in a world right now where there are people dying all around the world because people, like the Cardinal and others, over the centuries, as I said, have created this dynamic where all of those things that we talked about that make us determine how we communicate, they also, for centuries, have controlled societies and have told us who we're going to be and how we're to act in society. And so how do we reverse that trend? And I say we have to do it today because our world is in a place where we have to do that. So first of all, how do you speak your truth? You have to become self-aware. That's the very first thing you have to do. You have to speak your truth, and you have to talk to yourself first and determine your truth with yourself. Are you doing everything you want to do in life? Do you have any things that you're not accomplishing? Do the people that you love around you, are you able to do the things that you want to do for them? Are you doing and saying everything you want? Do you walk away from conversations during the day and you say, I wish I would have said, I wish I would have told them I love them. I wish I would have said or spoke up at a meeting. All of those things that we do every day are the things that really keep us from actually speaking our truth. And that comes from that elephant in the room and that fear that I talked about earlier. So you have to be self-aware and you have to determine what you want in life, and you have to ask yourself, am I accomplishing everything and is my life where I want it to be? That's the first thing you have to do. Because if we're not self-aware, we're not living in our own truth, we're not going to be authentic to the people that we're talking to. The second is that you have to rise above fear and really learn to speak past it. Now, I'm fearful every day. Everything I do through life, we have that constant fear in our mind. But what I've also learned is that you can get past that fear. And when we studied this, the way to get past that is know that the fear is there. recognize the elephant, and face it right in the eyes and say, I'm going to walk past you. It's not easy, but what you do, and the reason that you do it is because what you're doing is you're facing your fears, but you're doing what you need to do anyway. You're telling people what you need to say in life, and you're being who you are. This is Mashia Linajad. I don't know if you know who she is, but if you don't, please Google her. I was fortunate to be one of Foreign Policy's 100 Global Thinkers, and I saw these amazing people on stage. And Mashia Linajad has received many awards. She's a journalist from Iran, and she was disowned by her family, and on state television was exiled from the country because she said the hijab is the ultimate suppression of women in Iran. And so she started My Stealthy Freedom, which is a website that allows women from Iran to take photos of themselves without the hijab. And she has millions of followers now, and she is one that is speaking up for women around the world and saying, no longer will society suppress us because my voice, their voices deserve to be heard. She moved past that fear, and she took the risk that she did in order to do that. And we see that all over the world with people. We're seeing it in the streets of Caracas. We're seeing it in Hong Kong where it's happening. We're seeing it right here. We're seeing it in the United States. We're seeing the Me Too movement. There's people speaking up like her every day, and they're saying, no longer I'm going to let this fear get past me. And so we need to all be like Masih. But you also can't hide in a crowd. Because when you hide in a crowd, you're following someone, and you're not really being your authentic self. And so when you hide in a crowd, what happens when you're following someone, they may not lead you where you want to go. And what you're also not doing is allowing yourself to lead and where others may really want to follow. You know, we talked about Greta. Many people know this story. It's very current right now. You know, Greta, here she is sitting in front of the Swedish parliament. And she has the handmade sign that says we've got to step up and really talk about the environment. Greta mobilized just by this photo and her standing up and standing outside of the crowd. Millions and millions of people around. And you saw them in the streets in New York. You saw them around the world, now saying our environment has to change. And most recently, you saw her calling out the adults in the room in front of the United Nations, saying no longer will I take this and no longer should we take this, and your rhetoric has to stop. Action has to happen. And so there's people like that all over the world. Like I said, we're seeing it in cities all over where people are standing up and no longer saying, I'm going to take the world as it is, that I'm taking my voice back and I'm going to stand up for what's right. I'm not going to allow people around me and my loved ones and others around the world to be sacrificed because of the bullying and the hating that has happened over centuries. And I think this is something we all have to continue to do. So don't hide in the crowd. We have to step out and be who we are. The next is bring allies to have your back. I was very blessed that I had a lot of allies when I was going through this challenge. And the wonderful thing about it is that I knew they were there. I knew I had the backing of many people. But what you do is you build this wealth of knowledge around what people are doing. And you're there for them. And you build that bank of allies when you're there for them. And once you do that, when you need them, they have your back. And so you build your allies. And that's something that was very important for us. And one of the things I will say is that when you build your allies, there are people that will continue. And this is a story that I wanted to tell. And I put up the President of the Dominican Republic and the First Lady for a reason. When I had my welcoming reception, being the first U.S. ambassador to serve in the Western Hemisphere and be openly gay next to my husband, the Papal Nuncio, who is the Vatican's representative on the diplomatic corps, took me aside after we had only been in country for 2 weeks. And when we walked off the stage in our welcome reception in my backyard, he said, we're going to be having a welcome reception for the President and the First Lady of the Dominican Republic. And the spouses are welcome, but your husband is not. My first instinct was, as hopefully all spouses are, that's fine. I won't be attending, and nor will the United States. But what we didn't realize is, at that moment, when he started trying to backtrack, and then he doubled down in the press, other members of the diplomatic corps stepped out and said, we won't be coming if the U.S. ambassador's spouse isn't invited. And so what happened? You see the photo. Eventually, my husband and I attended with everybody else. not at the nuncio's residence, but somewhere else. And it was a welcome reception with everybody, including my spouse. So this is why it's important to have your back. There's people like Greta and others. You see the children at Parkland who, after the horrendous shooting, galvanized people around the world about gun violence. You saw those after the Orlando massacre, and the parents come out and say, this is happening to my children, and it's happening to others around the world. And you saw people come out behind them. You see it from Charlottesville to Hollywood, where the Me Too movement started, but yet now it's a worldwide movement to make sure women are never abused again. So we have to keep enforcing on each other that we can change that narrative from where it's been in the past. The last point that I will tell you is you have to achieve the unachievable. When I came to the Dominican Republic as the U.S. ambassador, the one thing I would say is that President Obama, when he made the nomination, he wasn't thinking about me being the first gay ambassador in the Western Hemisphere. He was just living in his own truth. He was speaking the truth about who he felt the United States was and who was the best person to represent him. He wasn't thinking anything other than I told him I loved the Dominican Republic, that this is a country that I loved. I loved the people, I loved the music, I loved everything about it. And he knew that I would go there and represent the United States alongside my husband. So he wasn't trying to create a controversy. He was doing as I said today. He was just living in his truth, speaking his truth, and doing what he knew was right to protect the values and to put forward the values of the United States. It's happening all over, and I hope that we continue to do that, because we can really achieve the unachievable if we band together and we support each other. This is a world that is in strife right now. And I've given you 4 points that we found that are very important in ways that you can overcome that fear, that elephant in your life. But I go back to that baby that was born, that baby where love was there, but over a period of time, the centuries of hate and control of societies and the elements of society have made us scared to do what we need to do, to speak out when we need to speak out, to lead when we need to lead, to get out from the crowd, to really make sure our voice is heard. And if we don't do that for the people that we love, if we don't do it for ourselves, and we don't do it around the world, the centuries of bullies and the centuries of those who suppress anybody who is marginalized will continue. So if I leave you with anything today, I know that in your personal lives, every day when you have that fear in your voice and in your head of saying, why don't I say something? I should say something. I need to protect them. I wish I would have spoke up. I can't believe they just said that to me. Don't have that fear anymore. Because once we get past that fear, this will be a world of love, not hate. And unfortunately right now, it's the reverse. So it's time to reverse the cycle of centuries. And I hope that you go out, you begin to speak your truth, you begin to let people know who you are, you be your authentic self, you promote love, not hate. And I can promise you, once you start doing that, you will achieve the unachievable. So thank you very much.